Hi, I'm Jill Osur, founder of Teneral Cellars, a woman-owned and run wine company. Join me as I have conversations with trailblazing women who are transforming the world with grit and grace. So grab a glass and let's drink some amazing wine together. Hi, welcome to this segment of Chill with Jill. I have the pleasure and privilege to be sitting with my dear friend, mentor, sister, just so many wonderful things when I think about her, Dr. Brenda Wade. And Brenda is America's love doctor. She is a holistic psychologist. She's all about body, mind, emotion, and spirit. And Brenda, thank you for being here today.
It's a pleasure.
Yeah,
it's a pleasure. Thank you for the invitation,
absolutely.
Jill. What's wrong with sitting here in a beautiful garden and
drinking
sipping
wine.
some delicious
Absolutely.
Teneral wine?
Yes.
Woohoo.
And as you know, Teneral is the definition comes from transformation and you know, transforming the world with grit and grace, always being, always becoming, and
everything I love.
Yeah, well, you know, we love that and we know how important that is. And our country is going, hopefully, through a good transformation. But with all transformation, there's pain and there's challenge and struggle. And, you know, as I started this company, a lot of it happened with COVID, but then it happened with Black Lives Matter. You know, I knew that because we had a diversity of investors and employees and customers, it was important with the murder of George Floyd to stand up and to speak out and to shoulder up with people that knew how wrong this was. And I got a lot of heat for that and backlash, which is shocking because, you know, anyone that's got their eyes open realizes what's happening. But I also know for me it's a time to listen and it's a time to learn and to even recognize my own biases that I've grown up with as a privileged white woman. And having you here today is because, you know, I want to talk about this because you're so in tune with what's happening. You're often called to be on television to talk about these tragedies that happen, the trauma that comes from that. And it's a time where our country needs healing. And how do we approach that when you have peaceful protesters, but you also have people that are showing up with violence? You know, how do we get through all of this, and how do we learn from this, and how do I and my friends become better allies?
Wow.
Sorry, it's a lot I packed in there.
It's okay. No, you hit me with the whole ball of wax, and that's okay. We'll take it apart step by step. And I think as a psychologist and as an African American woman, what's most important to me is that we seek to understand. And you know that the core of what I teach in all of our modern love trainings, and I only have a short while with you, so I'm not going to do some big training module, but I wish I could. The thing that's important is that we are here to develop heart power. And the 12 powers of the heart include poise, balance, self-control, love, wisdom, truth, compassion, understanding, forgiveness. All of those, and I've got 2 more to go, all of those are powers of the heart. So if you think, how can I exercise my heart power during this time? Do I need to deepen my understanding of what white privilege is? Do I need to deepen my understanding of what it means to be an African American living in this country? Or Latinx, because there's a link here between African American Latinx. And it's very important to understand what racism is, because most people go, oh my God, I'm not racist. We all are. We all are. It was sprinkled on our cereal every morning. It was flashed to us through every image that we saw on the cereal boxes, on the cartoons, on television, in the history books, in the textbooks, in the teachers, what they taught, everything. And I did a talk for an organization in Hollywood, and I put a picture up, and I think this might help people if you can visualize this with me, of people landing in New York Harbor, coming from Europe. These immigrants who are fleeing pogroms in Russia, where Jewish people were being murdered, fleeing the famine in Ireland, where the Catholic, Celtic-speaking Irish were being starved to death. The papers in London said, "Let the dirty papists starve." England created the famine. They pumped 90 billion tons of food out of, I think it was millions, sorry, millions of tons of food out of Ireland, and gave the food, the potatoes and all that, to the cattle. So we have a lot here around what is racism. How do we make the other as opposed to having compassion? These are human beings. So if you look at what happened to the immigrants who came early 1800s through early 1900s, most of them started coming, the big wave was around 1900. Well, in the 1600s, African people were brought here. So I had a picture, the earliest picture we could find of African people being brought here with no clothing, chains and coffles, chained together, versus the immigrants coming 200 years later with their children, with their bundles of clothing. Not to say they hadn't suffered terribly, but they came as intact families who could later send for their families. The strength of the family was there. Whereas for 200 years, these African people who were brought here with no family, no children, no spouses, no ability to send for family members and bring them, and every day they worked, sun up to sundown, with nothing to show for it. And on top of it, in order to justify using other human beings like this, it was necessary for the enslavers to dehumanize them, to say they're not people. They don't have feelings. They don't have the same needs and desires we have. They don't even have families and children like we do. So all of this became part of the psyche, because if you lie to people long enough, they believe it's the truth. So the people who were enslaved drank some of the poison. The people who were the enslavers created the poison and drank all of it. Drank all of it. But what people don't know, and I think it's important, is why the crushing, brutal treatment of the African people got worse over time. Because Willie Lynch was a Jamaican plantation owner, and he wrote the Willie Lynch letter and created lynching. The people enslaved in Jamaica, the people enslaved in Haiti, the people enslaved in the islands, and the people who were brought here African, staged, I went to the Library of Congress and researched this myself, 450 documented armed insurrections. So the African people weren't going, yeah, this is okay. They were going, heck no. Armed. Where did they get arms? They made spears and whatever. They burned down plantations. They did kill the enslavers, and then they would run for it. And Willie Lynch wrote a letter after massive uprisings in Jamaica. To this day in Jamaica, there are people that live in the hills known as the Maroons people. Those are the descendants of the original African people who were brought there. Because the Brits just went, look, don't come down here and kill any more of us. You can have the Highlands. And so they're still there in the Highlands because they couldn't defeat them. They just had to do a treaty and say go. So what we've got are these images of these frightening black people who would rise up and rebel. So the necessity to crush the spirit. Willie Lynch said, don't ever let them feel they can keep their families. Sell off the wives and the children. Separate them. Let's brutalize them. Let's terrorize them. So it's all in the letter. If anybody wants to read the letter, I actually put the letter in my second book, When Mama Couldn't Tell Us About Love. So this is the history. So you take this history where we've forgotten the brutality. We've forgotten all the lynching, unless you're black and you live in the South. And then we have modern day lynching, which is the police most recently shooting a young black father 7 times in the back in front of his 3-year-old, 5-year-old, 8-year-old child in Wisconsin. I didn't know that Kenosha, Wisconsin had a history of terrible racism. I did a show with the senator from Wisconsin, and it opened my eyes. I had no idea. She said, this isn't new. And she started going through the data. So what we've got is an opportunity. if you're African American, to tap into that heart power of compassion and forgiveness. If you're a white person and an ally, tap into the same heart power. Compassion, forgiveness, and understanding, but all of it has to lead to action. It has to lead to action. Because, none are free unless all are free. Because now I have to show my metaphysical side. I do science, psychology, and spirituality. And as a spiritual teacher, the integration point for me is understanding what the holographic field is. So this is both my physics and my spirituality. The holographic field is that your energy and mine are connected. We're all connected. And if we're connected and one part of the energy field is being suppressed, we're all losing energy. We're all losing the light, the gifts, the talents of those people. And we can't afford it. And we can't afford to be what I call raisin-hearted, where your heart's a dried up little raisin because you haven't been watering your compassion, your forgiveness, your love, wisdom, truth, all those powers I named. So you got to put some water in there. And the water is, how can I grow? How do I not cling to what I think is mine at the expense of somebody else? Because guess what? There's enough to share.
Yeah.
And anybody who is white in this country is enjoying the fruits of labor of my ancestors who built this country. And those who doubt that, go to the website Black Inventors and take a look at the things African Americans invented, including plasma, including the real McCoy engine, including fast drying paint. There are hundreds, thousands of things, not to mention the culture itself. So having said all that, it's really hard to confront racism. It really is. Because I've had so many good white friends say to me, but I'm not racist. And I have to say, you've been drinking the Kool-Aid like everybody else. And the fact that you would say that to me just says you haven't awakened yet to how it's operating. And it's hard to awaken. It's painful to awaken. It's hard. And, I had one person who was white call me and say the most appropriate things. How are you? This must be hard for you. I can't imagine how you're feeling. And I want to apologize to you for my racism. I'm working on it. That person was your daughter. She's the only person who called and said something so incredibly heartwarming and healing and appropriate.
Wow. Well, I know for me, she is, I talk to her every day about, I follow her social feed because it's educational for me.
Yes.
I had a lot of apologizing to do. I know, and I'll be vulnerable here. There was a time where I said I don't see color.
Right.
Because from my heart's perspective, I love all people and I want to treat people, equally.
Yes.
But I realize now that that was missing out on, I need to see color.
That's
I need
right.
to see that you've had a different experience than I have.
Yes.
That and that when we appreciate different experiences, when we appreciate different voices, then we're going to be a better place.
Absolutely.
But boy, I had a lot of, and I still do. And there's so much out there. Read Ibram X. Kendi's book about how to be an anti-racist.
Yes.
And it explains exactly how what you were saying of saying don't say I'm not a racist.
Right.
Because that's
we all are.
Yeah.
Even Black people have been drinking the poison for so long we don't realize it's seeped in.
Yes.
So one of the things that I want to bring as a psychologist is what the experience of African Americans has led to in terms of mental and emotional and physical health. Black people have escalated rates of any chronic illness you can think of, whether it's hypertension, diabetes, depression, anxiety, heart disease. And this 20% escalation is a result of systemic racism, living with the pressure. I had to teach my children not what to do if the police stop you, but what to do when they stop you. So my two gently raised daughters, private schools, all of it doesn't matter, were stopped by the police on their way to a wedding in Sebastopol. And my daughters were dressed to the nines and my younger daughter was driving her new car, and they were pulled over. And the police officer, your ID, and I taught them, keep your hands on the dashboard, because if you move too fast, they'll say you're reaching for a gun and they'll shoot you. So they had their hands on the dashboard. Good morning, officer. How are you? How can I help you? Now, officer, my driver's license is in my purse in the back seat. Do you want to get my purse out and hand it to me, or do you want me to get it? So, okay, officer, keep this hand up here. This is my purse. Do you see it over here? Slowly bring it out. God forbid they accuse you of having. So the whole thing ends with the officer saying to them, do either of you have a warrant out for your arrest, or are you on probation or parole? And it was all my elder daughter could do not to. She just took a breath and said, no, we've never been in trouble with the law, ever. Would you like to run a background check? So they get to the wedding they're going to. They describe this story to their friends. They're the only black kids there. And the friends go, oh, well, the police have stopped us. And they say, have you ever been asked if you're on probation or parole, if there's a warrant out for your arrest? And they're like, no. Yeah. So this is the projection. Now, the experience for my children and for me was an experience of hurt, rage, fear, anxiety. What if this had gone badly? The same for my stepsons, teaching them not what to do if, but when, so that they're trained. I taught my kids never go in a department store with a coat on or carrying a bag. Only take your wallet. So when security is tailing you, they can see you've got no place to steal anything. Because I know. So this projection is what leads to the anxiety, 20% more, the depression, 20% more, which leads to illness, because we know anxiety and depression that's chronic make you sick, right? So all of this comes home to, how do we treat the anxiety? How do we treat the depression? And I want anyone who's a person of color, because I know people of color, I don't care where your ancestors come from, but particularly if your ancestors were brought here and turned into the boogeymen, the official bad people, that depression and anxiety is part of it. And we need to engage in a healing process. And again, anybody who wants to engage in that with me, just hit me back at love@docwade.com, love, L-O-V-E, at docwade.com, and I will give you a free ebook. I will give you a free teleseminar to heal. Because, and anybody who's a white ally can also get the book and do the training right alongside, so that we can unlearn. And the beautiful thing about the human brain is, just like we were taught the lies and we were systemically programmed, we can unprogram ourselves. Now, it takes time and energy. It takes applied attention to reprogram. But this brain is a programmable tool. We can unprogram ourselves.
How do we, and that's so powerful, Brenda, because we all need to do the work. I mean, this is a work in progress. And in particular, white people like myself need to do a lot of work.
Well, bless you for being woke enough to say that.
Well, it's true. And I know that, if we actually have, varying experiences and diversity of experiences and diversity of voices, we'll have better companies, we'll have a better planet, we'll have a better world.
Absolutely.
So how do we start to change some of this systemic issues we have? I mean, how do we change police departments? How do we have more equity? I know my industry does not have a lot of equity in it, and it's one of my personal missions is to change that.
Yes.
There's 0.1% black winemakers. That's men and women.
Right.
There's only 10% female winemakers, so that's another issue for me.
Yes.
But 0.1%. I mean, that's unacceptable. And,
Yes.
And so I know my company will be far more successful if I have a diversity of experiences and voices. And I hope that that can be, a model for other businesses to see how successful we become, and that, we're better off because we have that kind of diversity and equity.
Absolutely.
But
Absolutely.
I see this divisiveness in this country when we talk about defunding the police. Yet I saw what Noah Trevor said the other day was, how come you have to have perfection when you're an airline pilot? You can't have bad pilots, right?
Yes.
But yet somehow we're mixing up this conversation of, we can't have bad police officers.
No, we can't. We absolutely can't. And It's a complex issue. It has to do with training. In England, all the police officers get 2 years of training. In America, they get 3 months to 6 months maximum.
Wow.
They are not as well trained as they should be. And I think we can change that. I think we can give our police, and I have worked with the police, I've worked with the fire departments. I was brought in 20 years ago to help with unlearning racism when there was a consent decree that was passed in San Francisco. The most important thing as a humanist that's important to me, remember my mentor created humanistic psychology, is that police are human beings. They are struggling with what they grew up with, and any officer who's prone to violence, 90% of the time, grew up with violence. And we need to do a better job helping officers to do the inner work as part of their training, having a really great pool of training to draw from. And I think extended training has to be part of it. You know, I made the point about the officers in the UK get 2 years of training.
Yeah.
Here, people get 3 months,
Are we
6 at the
asking?
most.
Are we asking officers to do too much?
I think we are asking officers to do too much. Here in the Bay Area, we have what we call the black and whites. And those are officers trained in psychological and psychiatric care. So if somebody's having a hard time and they're mentally disturbed, instead of shooting them, which has happened all over the country, black women being shot who are having psychotic episodes, and officers, rushing into the scene and somebody's disturbed and they don't know what to do. And then we have racial bias, which is if there was a white guy who was clearly mentally disturbed and was waving a gun, the police didn't shoot him. They managed to disarm him. There's a video on the internet.
Yes.
People can look at that. So it's the racial bias, it's the poor training that doesn't account for the bias, and it's officers bringing their own racist projections to the party. And all of this can be transformed. But it takes really excellent training, body, emotions, mind, and spirit, because the body, the gut brain fires first, and that gut brain fires before the head brain. So you've got to learn. I teach people what I call the 10-second rule. Give yourself 10 seconds. In the 10 seconds, you say to yourself, what would I be doing if this person were white? Would I be sending this kid out of the classroom? Because black and brown boys are sent out of the classroom. White kids are kept in the classroom. The parents are called. Black kids are expelled. It's happened in my own family. Across the board, not just police officers, educators, doctors, people in hospitals. We know that black people are treated differently wherever they go.
So when you're training some of these, in these police departments, because clearly if you're a teacher, 10-second rule applies, you have 10 seconds.
Mm-hmm.
Some of these instances, what we hear is, it's an instantaneous. So
It's instantaneous, and so you shoot somebody in the back who's unarmed.
Yeah.
You kill a woman in her bed while she's sleeping.
Not okay.
Breonna Taylor.
Yes.
I mean, she's lying in her bed naked asleep, and they just come in and they shot her, 22 times? And she was alive for 5 minutes after that. I mean, this is horrifying. So if you take the 10 seconds and say, is this a high-risk situation? Do we need to come in and unleash bullets on somebody we don't even know what's going on?
Well, and the person they were looking for was in custody already.
Right.
So clearly now we're talking about more systemic issues as well.
It is systemic.
And so the rage now, with the Breonna Taylor ruling, the only...
unbelievable.
Yes, it's absolutely... And
she just died. Nobody's responsible.
Right. Well, and the only gentleman that's responsible is, he's getting a slap on the hand for shooting into the neighbor's room.
Right.
So it's justifiable that people are angry.
Yes.
And
angry, hurt. Remember, anger and pain go hand in hand. People only look at the anger. They don't look at what's behind it. It's hurt. It's pain. I've lived with this throughout all the generations of my family. It is so painful to see it again, that literally her life didn't matter. It didn't matter that she was in her early 20s. Was she 21 years old? And she just finished her EMT training? The contributions, the dreams that she had to bring to everyone else, it didn't matter because her skin was brown.
So how do you stay hopeful in a time like
You
this?
know, I'm the queen of hope, and I believe in being positive, and I believe in hard work. And I've got my sleeves rolled up, and I'm on the ground. I've curated the organizations that I choose to give my time and energy to, and that my voice can be heard in those organizations. And, you know, I've been doing this training, this anti-racism training for any organization that calls on me, because the typical training isn't deep enough. We've got to get to where the subconscious reservoir of learning is and unlearn that, and then learn something new.
Mm.
And the best training is experiential. It's not talking at people, because the brain doesn't uptake the information if you're just talking at. The brain can turn that off. You know that, in one ear, out the other. What we have to have is a fully embodied experience. That's what changes the dynamic. That's what police have to be trained in. It's the only thing that's going to help. And it's across the board. You know, we have Black women are, 70% more likely to die. I think it's a higher number than that. Don't quote me on my numbers. But it's an astronomically higher number. Serena Williams almost died in childbirth.
Right.
Because the medical professionals wouldn't listen to her. So it's across the board. It is systemic. Our system has an infection, and we need the medicine. The medicine is, how do I work on my racism, because I know darned well I grew up in this country, my family grew up in this country, I've been infected, and I've got to take the medicine.
And so for everyone listening out there, all the women of color who've had similar experiences to yours, how do they stay hopeful?
You know, my way of taking care of myself during this time is I let myself cry when I need to, because I've shed a lot of tears. And they were tears that went back across the generations. I started recognizing things that I hadn't recognized before for what they truly are. The struggles that I knew were racist now also fit into some other struggles that I could see across the generations and in my own life. So, yeah, we have to grieve. We have to feel the sadness, feel the pain. We have to talk about it. And we have to allow allies in. And then we also have to have safe, private spaces to have the deep conversations where we don't have to worry about, is somebody in the room who's not in touch with their racism? Is somebody here who's not going to get it? And I think above all, it's turning to the resources that African Americans in particular have always turned to. And those are spiritual resources. Whatever spiritual path you have, this is a time to double down, triple down. And unfortunately, during COVID, we can't gather. So get on those online, Zoom meetings, trainings, services, and practice meditating. Let the meditation of my heart be acceptable. That's one of the verses that a lot of people know, because meditation is medicine. Meditation allows us to download all the stress hormones, allows us to recalibrate the brain and reload the brain with oxytocin, serotonin, all the things that make you feel good. Helps you to bring your estrogen levels up if you're in a female body, testosterone levels up if you're in a male body. Meditation is medicine. So, I teach meditation in all of our trainings, and I want everybody to learn how to take that deep breath, drop into the present, and be one with all of this, and at the same time know that I fully and firmly believe there is a power greater than ourselves at work. And this is a time of awakening around the world, because it's not just happening here.
Yes.
I'm watching Belarus and Russia, and watching what's happening in Latvia and Poland, and what's happening in the UK. People are marching everywhere for racial justice. We've got dictators being overthrown on the African continent. Around the world, people are going, we've had enough of oppression and suppression. We're stepping into a new awareness, and it's an awareness that will make us all healthier, and I believe make the world and the earth healthier too.
That's great. Thank you. And thank you so much for sitting down with me today, because this is a conversation that I'm so glad we're having, but more people need to have this. And, you know, and the resources are out there for
Tons of
allies
books.
like myself that,
Yeah.
that want to help. Because I think our job, again, is to listen more. If I hear another white person say, no, that doesn't really happen,
Yeah, right.
it's not our place to say that, because it clearly happens.
Totally.
And that's where we do need to see the color and see that your experience is different than ours, and be supportive in all the ways that there are for us to do that. And I know certainly at Teneral Cellars, I am committed to hiring women of color, and to make sure that they get to leadership positions, if not hired into a leadership position, because I know my business will be better for that.
Yes.
And
You know,
absolutely.
there's, this is the last thing I have to say, and I can't help it. Speaking as a scientist, everything vibrates at a specific frequency. And we've measured all that. We have states of consciousness. Dr. David Hawkins started this whole thing of measuring emotional states. And down at the bottom, the lowest calibrating state is shame. It's down close to 0. It measures at 20. And then you go up, right above shame is guilt. And then we've got all the other, you know, things that suppress our energy, which in the long run make us sick. Great depression, anxiety. Now, to get above the line, you have to get to 200. And 200 is courage. Just have the courage to look at what's going on and say, what can I learn from it and how can I help?
Yes.
That takes courage. And if we just get there, the rest is all gravy, because then you get up to the good stuff like love, enlightenment, joy.
Yes. Well, I certainly hope for all the women watching that they have the courage to stand up, to speak up, to shoulder up, because there's no question if the women in this world come together collectively,
Yes.
that not only would we rule the world, but the world would be at a better place, and everyone
we
would
gotta
eat.
have 50-50,
And, yes.
50-50 men and women leadership.
Yes.
My hero is Prime Minister Jacinda, New Zealand. Look at New Zealand.
Oh, look at New Zealand.
Look what she's done.
Yes.
So here's
Yes.
to women bringing our heart-centered power
Absolutely.
to everything that we do. And let's have a nice sip of this delicious wine
Cheers
from Teneral
to you, my friend.
Cellars.
Thank
Cheers
you
to
for joining
Jill.
me today,
My
Brenda.
pleasure.
Really, so grateful to have you here today.
My pleasure.
Cheers.
Thank you. Blessings. Blessings.